Professor Klisman Murati, we're very pleased to have you with us today. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Your insights into global geopolitical dynamics and the behavior of international companies in fragile environments are extremely valuable for us. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Professor, according to the Global Power Index developed by Pareto Economics, Iraq ranked 80 of 194 countries. From your perspective, what does this position reveal about Iraq's overall national strength and institutional capacity?
Well, Iraq has gone through various different political changes and identities since the Ottoman Empire time. So what we're measuring as it relates to Iraq is what potential does it have for it to secure its own interests. That's what the index measures. 194 countries across the world. We're not measuring, is a country able to force another country to do what it wants? It's not measuring that. It's measuring the potential of a country. But what matters with that potential is what the leadership of a country can do with it, what their plans for the future are, and how well they execute on these plans. This is something that only the leadership can do, along with support from civilizations. Them working together can create something long-term and, more importantly, sustainable for the good of the people. So when we're looking at Iraq, what we're seeing is that amongst all the countries in the world, it still has a long way to go for it to be able to have the potential so that it can actually execute on the agendas of the government.
All right.
So the only way they can do this is by having a strong idea of what they want to achieve in the long term. Because without that, a country is going from one idea to the next or one opportunity to the next without having a holistic and long-term view as to what potential have we got, can we measure it, can we execute on it, and is this sustainable for the long term for our people? Without this in mind, then we will continue, unfortunately, to see a lot of conflict within Iraq. We will continue to see opportunities missed and not seized properly. And this is just the hardcore reality on the ground as it stands. Coming into 2026, we're going to see continued, in my opinion, tensions and conflicts that we've seen over the last 20 years still there. Because although the Prime Minister won a new mandate to rule, what we need to see from the leadership is a concrete plan that has the motivation and the political behind it to make it happen. And if that comes to be into the new year, then we may see some positive changes on the horizon. But Iraq is faced with many, many different issues that haven't just emerged now, but have emerged over the years. So we can't expect them to change wholesale overnight, of course.
Yeah, that can't
but
be
what we
really
hope is that civil society becomes stronger and the actual pressures on the government to provide good results for its people become even more intense so that it's given a direction to actually make these changes for the better.
Well, so based on its position, in your global power index, does Iraq fall into the category of states that foreign companies can influence more easily? That's what I hear.
Yeah, well, what happens is that when a country doesn't have strong institutions, then it's at risk of, number one, not being investable in the first place. So it's not even that companies can take advantage of it, is that many corporations, depending on the sectors they're in, and also depending on the regulations they face as a sector, will not want to enter the country because of inconsistent and non-clear rules as to how do we engage with the government. Because if they do try to engage and it takes too long, and especially if they have an offering which is of value to that country, they won't engage for too long because they'll see that it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and it's a waste of effort. Iraq isn't unusual in terms of its political dynamics. Many international corporations have faced inconsistent political dynamics in different parts of the world. So in those cases, it's only those corporations which truly understand the political landscape, which have a good relation with the administrations, and which has an offering which either can't be provided internally by domestic companies, or there's a lot of competition in that market for these services or these products, that we will see continued engagement within that country. So what the country really has to do is strengthen its institutions so that it attracts even more investment from the outside and also domestically for domestic companies to succeed in a business environment of progress and prosperity, as opposed to stalled progress, which we see consistently with countries which have gone through the kind of turmoil that Iraq has gone through over the last 40 years.
So, Professor, like, how do middle power or fragile states typically behave when interacting with powerful international companies?
Well, there's not a blueprint for how this happens across the world, but what's for sure is that when there is an international corporation which wants to engage with a fragile government, it wants to engage, first of all, because it sees a good business opportunity for itself. Because especially when it comes time to industries, and I think we'll talk about this later, where changing its infrastructure becomes increasingly difficult and it becomes very sticky, like the telecommunications sector and the introduction of 4G, 5G, and the next generations into the future. That hardware that gets installed typically doesn't change overnight. And it takes a long time for it to be dismantled from the technological infrastructure of that country. So when it comes to these big corporations that operate globally, typically they either come from Western governments or they come from Asia. And there are some, obviously, which are global, which come from some Middle Eastern countries. But these are the typical forces or offerings, either the West or Asia, that come into a country like Iraq and want to do business with a country like Iraq because it sees opportunities for itself. Now, when it's engaged in a way that's productive, where the rules are clear, where they can do business above board properly, then the process becomes easier and things move faster. And speed in an age where competition is so fierce is what will allow you to move forward faster as a country. Without these institutions and without these rules of engagement clearly in place, it becomes very difficult, because what you have is internal players and domestic players that are emerging that do not want external competition to take a piece of the market, naturally. That's the case for any business. But when these business players are connected and have stronger relations with the domestic government, then any external player needs to really truly understand the dynamics of the country and needs to have an offering which is either better than the internal competitors or has a better relation with the government at that time. So, which becomes very messy, which becomes very sticky for any person involved. And that's where you see talks of corruption. And that's where you see a playing field which becomes messy, and that deters big time. Just to finish this point, it deters other kinds of companies and other types of products and services from wanting to enter the market, because they see, if this big corporation is having such big issues with its government, then we're not going to bother because we see better business opportunities elsewhere. So no matter who you are as a player, whether you're a corporation or you're a government, having clear rules and rules which are followed only makes your country succeed and work better. So
what is the vulnerabilities? Like, do states in the category face when dealing with, let's say, foreign actors in a strategic sector like, telecommunication?
Well, telecoms is not just faster Wi-Fi so you can use TikTok faster. That's not the only use case. And perhaps for the majority of consumers, having fast internet speeds is good for them. But when it comes time to the strategic benefit of having this infrastructure in place, what matters for a country like Iraq is, unless you can develop your own domestic infrastructure, and to be honest, none of the Middle Eastern countries have developed the core infrastructure needed for 5G rollout, and in the future 6G rollout, you must rely on external partners. Now, when you rely on external partners, let's see the landscape we have. We either have the Chinese with ZTE and Huawei, or we have European and Western partners like Nokia and Ericsson providing this core infrastructure. And they make up the majority of the solutions for this kind of infrastructure. So when Iraq is stuck in the middle thinking, who do we partner with? You must make it easy for the country to make these decisions. When the Chinese come along, they're not asking for they're not asking for things which make business harder. Whereas Western companies require changes, reforms in a country so that their technologies and their products and services are more easily available to that country. So naturally, when it comes into Iraq, Huawei is the company which has rolled out a lot of infrastructure. It's cheaper. It's built to fit solutions. Its rollout has been faster. For these reasons, they've moved along with Huawei. But when it comes to the other infrastructure of the country, we see other Western players wanting to engage with Iraq for the very purposes of seeing how big of an opportunity it is for them to engage with that country.
So are these vulnerabilities like structural, meaning they come from, let's say, weak ministries and regulatory like institutions?
So I didn't hear the question.
Are these vulnerabilities like structural, meaning they come from weak ministries and regulatory institutions?
So when it comes time to the vulnerabilities that Iraq faces with these things, again, Iraq has gone through, a lot of different changes in its history. And it's not one holistic government. You have different semi-autonomous regions with the Kurds in the north, and you have a structure in place where because of that, there's two separate regulatory environments and motivations for the country to move forward its infrastructure for telecommunications and its rollout. So the Kurdish Autonomous Region has a different perspective and has a different approach to it, and the central government has a different one. So when it comes time to actually building out these infrastructures, the physical reality is that with two different regulatory paths, it becomes increasingly difficult to roll it out across the whole country. And also when it comes time to its security concerns, if 5G infrastructure is placed in an area where there's high security concerns, there's no guarantee that that infrastructure will be in place tomorrow. It may be damaged, it may be destroyed, which costs a lot of effort, time, money, to replace and to make sure that it's made secure. So these things stop innovation and stop things from happening fast. You see what I mean? That's the main thing. Because naturally, again, as you mentioned, 5G can be used for military purposes, and it increasingly is the primary source for development is the military side of things. And then it rolls out into the private sector. So again, when it comes down to Iraq, who do you want to have access to your data? Who do you want to place metadata in the hands of?
Yeah,
so this is a big battle happening
yeah.
at much higher levels than Iraq between the Americans, the Europeans, and the Chinese when it comes down to this, because big metadata becomes almost as valuable as gold and oil for the positionings of these countries.
Of course,
you see? So these are the dynamics which are happening on the ground in Iraq and also every other part of the world too.
So when states lack strong technological leadership, how does that affect its ability to evaluate, advanced proposals such as a 5G?
Well, first of all, you must have in a country the expertise in the cabinet, in the government to assess the value and the quality of offerings that are coming from these different service providers. So you need to make sure that whoever is in charge of your technology, your rollout, your innovation, and all these things together, whoever is responsible for that department, or if this responsibility goes out across different departments, you must have competent people in leadership positions to make these decisions. Because without that, you're not making the best decisions. You're relying on external partners to sell you the ideas that they want to sell you for their own benefits. So this must be core in any government that is in existence today. Apart from that, what you need is an execution plan of how do you actually roll these things out? What partners do you work with? If you do not have the domestic capacity to do it yourself, you must rely on external partners. So when it comes time to the bidding processes, when it comes down to the tendering process, when it comes down to all of these different things, the reason why having transparent tendering processes is necessary is because what you get is the best offering on the table. You get an offering which is perhaps cheaper, which is more effective, and you as a government decide which offering do I go for. When the tender is closed or when there's not much of a tender, you don't have the ability of plurality in your choices, and that limits your options as to what do you actually use and who do you use for this very, very essential rollout, okay? And I suppose another point to keep in mind is that who will be using this infrastructure? What are the needs of the businesses on the ground for this infrastructure? Because without that being a clear idea of who will use this, what the benefits will be, then you may spend a lot of time, money, and effort installing these things, but with low uptake, with low adoption. And when this becomes the case, a lot of wasted money and effort goes into these projects without actually it being useful or necessary for the stage of development that country is in. Not saying that you should completely disregard it, but you must put it into context in terms of what are you going through as a country now? what are your priorities, what are your ambitions, and what do we need to have on our team to make this happen. That's true for a corporation, for a family, for a government, right? Or for even something like the United Nations. You must have an idea of what you want to achieve and what resources do you have to achieve this. And this is what the Global Power Index does. It gives you this framework. It gives you this idea of where a country is located at the moment, where it's been, how it's developed in the past, and where do we see its trajectory going into the future.
Clearly.
So if we're advising a country like Iraq, we can tell them exactly what it is it needs to do better to make sure it achieves its aim in a faster and more cost-effective way.
So, but does this mean like governments may approve technology they don't like fully understand?
Well, there is a risk of that, of course, because again, if you don't have the competencies to realize what it exactly is that we're buying, you may be spending money on things which are not necessary. You know, and that's not a case of only Iraq faces this. Many countries across the world buy softwares and buy solutions which they may be understood, but they may not be used to the point where they need to spend all that money for. So again, having efficiencies in your government is as important, right, as making the money in the first place. Because again, with oil being the prime revenue generator of Iraq and oil prices being quite high now compared to COVID times, there's money coming into the country. So it's how much money you make, but it's also how much, and from the money you make, how well do you spend it in the right places? Because wasted money is akin to not making as much money because it's wasted and it's not being used for the right reasons. You see what I mean? Indeed. So that's what a government needs to make sure it does properly.
So how important is institutional expertise when a government assesses offers, you know, like from advanced telecom or technology providers, sorry. So like how important is institutional expertise when a government like assesses offer, you know, like from advanced telecom or technology providers, you know?
I don't understand the question.
See, like the whole thing is like how important is institutional expertise when a government assesses offers from, you know, advanced telecom or technology providers?
Yeah, of course. Listen, as I said before, it's probably the most important thing. Look, the countries which are the most successful in the world, have their cabinet and have their political leadership being experts in that field. You know, because without expertise in that field, you're going to waste money, you're going to miss big opportunities, right? And you're going to make sure that you don't make the best decisions for the short, medium, and long-term future of your country. So if you do not have the expertise within your government by the ministers themselves, then you must seek this expertise, you know, within your population, with working groups, with consultancies, with anyone who you think has an independent, and which is the most important thing, an independent voice in this, so they can provide to you the expertise that you will lack as a government. So if you have the right expertise to hand, and if they are independent sources of advice, then you are in a much better position to, number one, spend, you know, public money in a much better way, you know, because that money will come, a portion of it will come from taxes, or if you're like Iraq, it comes from a mixture of taxes and also oil revenue, which is sold by, you know, the state-owned oil companies and the oil companies within the country. So this revenue that comes in is a good feature of the country. So forget even 5G rollout. Think about if a country wants to actually diversify their economy, which Iraq wants to do, which, to be honest, every country which is heavily reliant on one or two resources wants and must do. To do that properly, if you do not have the expertise to do that, you're not going to find the opportunities, you're not going to have the ability to dream bigger because you don't have the people on your team that can actually do that. So what you're stuck doing is working with the domestic business community, which again may not have the ideas or may not be incentivized to have better ideas because there's no push from government to have a tendering process or a competition process which is competitive. Without a competitive tendering process, then you're going to have the same kinds of companies doing the same kinds of business, offering the same kinds of services, which typically, if there's no competition from the inside or outside, tend to get worse over time. And if it gets worse over time, people's lives aren't improving. The growth of the country based off of non-oil revenue continues to decline. And there becomes a malaise in the country. And with that, consistently compounded over time, you have public tensions, which then turn into riots, which then turn into protests, which can get violent, which again loses the trust in the people. So you must understand that with good expertise at the top comes a much better society downstream. Over time, done properly and consistently, this leads to improved nation building capacity. This is why it's so important for any government to take note of this, right? And you
Yeah.
must have the incentives and the structures from the top. No other place will suffice. From the top by saying, this is what we want to do. These are our plans and our incentives. We must bring in external expertise. But of course, to do this takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of the current business networks to be dismantled or to be changed for this to become a reality, which it takes a long, long time and takes a lot of guts and a lot of force and a lot of energy from the government to do properly.